Eh bien, 14 heures, c'est l'heure. Bonjour à tous.
Right, 2 p.m. sharp. Time to start this session on identity, digital identity, which is a topic of the month. I've seen several conferences on digital identity. I know it's a
La sécuriser et se demander
very important topic. How do we secure digital ID? I'm Eric Leven. I'm a journalist for Archimag, and I can prove my identity. I have a French ID card. You probably have one in your pocket. On your French ID card, on the back, you have a QR code and a chip. And in the chip, you may or may not know that there are a lot of information: my date of birth, my name, my height, my gender, my nationality, my home address, the expiry date, the number, a digitalized picture, but also my fingerprints. So I can prove my identity with my ID card. I also have a journalist card, a press card. That's a professional identity card. I have a carte vitale, a health services card with a picture and a chip. I have a driving license. I have a credit card, a license card for my sport. So I am who I say I am.
Vous pouvez comparer les photos.
Also, you can compare the photographs on the card and my face, and you can make sure that it's not an AI picture. Now, this is all more difficult in the digital world. Nothing
Que c'est bien Eric Leven.
could prove to the organizers of this event that I was indeed Eric Leven to come and facilitate this panel. I think it was based on trust. And by the way, when you came in, a lot of people got their badge scanned and asked their ID. I didn't get asked for anything.
Même chose. Alors,
But I am who I say I
je suis
am.
rentré dans ce salon. Voilà, personne ne sait.
Now, I entered this room. No one knows whether I am Eric Leven or not. Same thing this morning on the train. I connected to the collective tools of people in my company with passwords, identifier, already pre-filled, so no one knows whether I am indeed the one pushing the button. No one makes sure that I am Eric Leven. Everything is done in our digital lives to facilitate access, authentication. Everything has to be fast. Speed is of the essence. I think Facebook Connect was the first to launch into that in 2004, then Google, Apple, then France Connect and France Connect Plus emerged 10 years ago already. Since we've had the digital ID La Poste, that was back in 2020, and 2020 we saw the birth of 2022 we saw the ID for France Identity, where you associate your digital identity with your physical ID card. And I think now you can also load your carte vitale, so your healthcare card, and your driving license, so always to make our lives easy. But we see that each identity card is meant for a specific purpose. And there's another one that we've more or less forgotten about, one digital identity that we all had. Remember the COVID period where you had to justify name, address, whether you were vaccinated or not, whether you were within the allocated hour to go and do your shopping. That was also a digital identity during the COVID time. And on top of the identities, then you add the wallets. The first one available was Apple Wallet back in 2012, where you could store credit cards, transport cards, loyalty cards, etc. Followed in 2013 by Google Wallet, and we're waiting for the European wallet now. This long introduction to say that we have a very intensive digital life, and if there is one document that we have on us all time of day or night, it's our mobile phone, smartphone. I don't always carry my ID card, but I always have my mobile phone. It becomes an identity in and of itself, covering many digital identities. So it's very convenient, but it requires a layer of safety and security. And this is the point of our panel with 4 experts. Elias Létier, in charge of Identity Digital Trust within the INCYBER, the French agency. Eric Vétiard, lead certification expert within the European ENISA for cybersecurity. Nicolas Laurenchet, sales director of Another Way. And our guest star, American guest star, coming from a small city close to Washington, David Bielowski, industrial board member of the DSA, Document and Security Alliance. So, gentlemen, can you say a few words about who you are, who you represent, what institution you represent, even though I think most people in the room are familiar? Maybe we start with you, David.
Thank you for having me. I apologize. My French is terrible. I won't try, and I won't embarrass you or myself. I am a member of the Document Security Alliance. I am an industry board member. We are an alliance of government, industry, and academia. We work together to advocate and educate and promote secure identity documents, other secure documents like currency and things of that nature. But with this being the identity forum, I'll focus on identity documents. And I say documents because most likely, even if you have a mobile phone with an identity on there, it was derived from a physical ID. Whether you actually scanned the physical ID and brought it in, or whether the digital ID was issued by the issuing authority and sent to your phone, it is still, in our opinion, a document, even though it's not a piece of paper. So you have the root of the identity in the physical document. DSA promotes that identity document to be secure, in that it needs to be produced securely, it needs to be personalized securely, it needs to be issued in a secure method. If you were to look up DSA, you would find out that we are about 20 years old. We were created right after 9/11 in response to the fact that all of the 9/11 hijackers had fake documents on them. That's how they got through airport security, and they started clamping down on the actual issuance of identity documents. In that case, it was physical documents and passports and visas, driver's licenses, and so on. For us, we don't really have a national ID. We'll talk about that later. But the primary focus was to secure the actual identity documents themselves, because there was a lot of lapses in how those things were procured. We have about 100 members across industry, academia, and government. It's about a third each. And we have a number of different activities that we're pursuing. One of them that we're doing right now is called No Fake IDs. And that is, believe it or not, in the US, kids are going out, I say kids, 20-year-old, 19, 18, who want to drink. It's against the law in the US to drink if you're under 21. And so they go out and procure a fake ID, and they actually will give all of their biographical, biometric, and their physical ID to the quote-unquote bad guys. And then those bad guys now have all of their identity, right? So they can now have their identity stolen and can be misused, all so that they can go out and drink. So we're trying to educate the kids, the schools, the local police, the bartenders, and everyone else not to accept those IDs, not to get those IDs in the first place, and to make them aware of what the pitfalls are associated with those fake IDs. I mentioned there's about 100 members. I don't know if you guys can see the screen. It's very small print. I apologize. If you go to the last slide that I had, it's a LinkedIn page. You can go up and see all of our members there. You can check us out and follow us. I highly recommend that. And then if there's any questions later on DSA, feel free to ask. I will stop talking about DSA.
Voilà, pardon, j'ai un peu de retard dans les slides. Je voulais juste...
Sorry, I'm lagging behind in the slides. I wanted to show you the list of the members. You can go on the website of the DSA anyway, and you find all the relevant information, and you have the contact number, the email of Dave. If you want to write it down, now is your time. I'm happy to be with you. I'll try and be brief. above and beyond identity, I'd like to talk about the risks today, cyber or humans, and digital print. We can talk about identity, but in our daily lives, we do a number of things. We publish information on digital platforms, and when we close the platforms, those platforms get attacked, and some of the private data that you've communicated are found on other sections of the web where they can be exchanged among criminals. That's your digital print, and it's connected intimately to the notion of identity. So we developed softwares for companies, mainly for organizations, to really assess the human factor, the human risk, and put in place protection measures, because you always end up being a victim when the risk is too high, because the platforms we all use are regularly attacked. This is what I'd like to share with you today, and maybe a few words on what we see in terms of our use of digital and the vulnerabilities that it creates. Eric, a few words on the ENISA? Eric Vétillard. I'm expert in certification at the ENISA. I'm part of the team developing certification patterns. Clouds for myself and the one for the digital ID wallet. The ENISA is the cyber security agency of the European Union. Our mandate, in a nutshell, is to help the European Commission in developing and implementing all rules and regulations connected to cyber security. We had an advisory role for companies, so we publish reports, for example, on the implementation of IDs 2. We're getting ready for the CRA aspects, which will take us over like a tsunami in years to come. We also have more ground-based activities, operational activities, for example, in EDIS 2 CRA in coming years, for example, regarding the centralization of incident data reported at the European level, so between different countries, cross borders, or vulnerability databases. So this is part of our mandate. And we also, at the agency, we have a new task, which is more at a strategic level. I think every 2 years, we have to take stock of cybersecurity in the European Union, and we have to keep up and update a number of documents and reports on the state of cybersecurity in the different member states of the European Union. And we also have to forecast and work on looming threats. Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Hélès Letillier. I'm in charge of the identity segment within ANSSI, within the industrial and technological section, managing the policy of ANSSI in terms of digital identification means and trust services. L'ANSSI, as you know, is the French supervision authority, and we own the certification process for the wallet. This is the reason of our presence, to explain the impact of this identity that will help you to turn to trusted services online, and what we promote in terms of harmonization, standardization of the identity, and really we're trying to push private actors, because the public services can't answer all the needs and all the potential usages. We talked this morning about the list of attributes. We will see it with the new trusted services, not just signature, but archiving, recording. We see that the IDAS 2 regulation is really having an impact on our policies. It's quite stringent in terms of complexity, in terms of certification process, and Eric will agree with me on that. So we're here to talk about the long-term and short-term incidents. Yes, I said it by way of identity. Prove your identity in the real world is quite easy with your ID card, which has been made more and more secure over the years, even if there are still false documents. I was reading in the newspaper this morning that there are still ID cards being stolen and sent abroad to forgers. But in the numeric, in the digital world, it's even more complex. So the first question I have for you all is, what is the current situation in terms of security of digital ID? And coming back to something else I read, for example, the creation of false Uber accounts that are sold for 1,500 to 2,000 euros, or the connection between false documents and bank accounts. What is the current situation in terms of identity theft, fraud? Do you have figures? Do you have trends? No figures. Well, I have figures, but I can't tell you my figures. The reality is that the ANSSI now has been in charge of checking identity remotely for a long time. We're a reference in Europe. In the meantime, a lot of work has gone on in the field of standardization, harmonization. As you know, we at the ANSSI, we prone harmonization via standardization, because we do work through the French Agency for Standardization, AFNOR, in order to come up with a common standard. What we did with our reference is to push a number of ISO standards, to really see how we can remotely check identity and how we can do that in a unified manner throughout Europe. Now we see new ways of doing that. I can't say too much on the topic, but our desire is to see that standards which are really at the base of verification, we want the standards to be equally applied everywhere in Europe, and we want to protect our ecosystem so that our ecosystem is aligned with our framework, legal framework, so anti-money laundering, etc., but also dealing with onboarding, remote identification, again, so that we can have a unification of existing standards. So we have a whole strategy in place to protect identities, which does not really stem from what ANSSI sees as security, but it's the result of the work of a number of experts and providers that have been certified throughout a number of operations, because our utmost concern is that citizens are safe, citizens are protected. So today the reference point we have is what it is. We're waiting for the new law in Europe. We're waiting for the new report of the European Commission on implementation, so that we can have a clear reference and guideline, version 8, to give national recognition for a number of providers, but also telling providers how to go and target other countries in Europe.
Nous, on regarde finalement ce sujet en termes de tendance.
Now, in terms of trend, we're looking at threats, and we're looking at threats on individuals. Identity, very often there's a theft of identity, a theft of digital accounts. We are a software provider, developer. We have an application to protect all our co-workers. And if we look at our statistics, 60% of users have credentials that have leaked. Credentials meaning passwords and ID. Everybody knows that. If we go in detail, we see that 35% of our users have a postal address which is known by cyber attackers. And if we have a bit less than 30% of users where you can detect a Facebook profile very easily, and out of those Facebook accounts, 40 are opened to have access to photos and videos, or providing access. So if you steal an account, you can then very easily steal an identity. So identity is always associated, in our opinion, to a question of digital print. Maybe a word? For me, digital ID, every time there's an attack, a threat, nearly every time there's a problem with identity, either because you have a leaked password or because you gave a photocopy of an ID card, a false one. So it's not so much whether there are attacks on identity, that's a fact, but how do we prove our identity and how can we prove that what we say is true? Something else that is important, when you change the way people have to prove their identity, you have to make sure that they understand what they're doing and they can use it. Today, when I show my ID card to anyone, this person can understand it's me. If I show a photocopy or a scan with a QR code on my mobile phone, half of the people will just look at the picture and say, okay, it's him. But that's not good enough. That's not good enough. So we have to change the ways we do things. People have to understand what to look for. So we're looking at security aspects with ANSI, with all the stakeholders we work with. But we also have to make people understand how they have to ensure more security in the way they use their digital ID, because this is going to give rise to a lot of scams, how identity or accounts will be stolen. This is a topic that is very important. How do we increase identity literacy? How do we make people understand how to be less vulnerable? And before we continue, can we give a definition of what digital identity is? We've talked about France Connect. I've talked about our professionals' accounts, private accounts. And I was reading this morning a report by ENISA dating back to July 23, stating in its final recommendations that politicians in the EU should provide a clear legal definition of what digital ID is. What is a digital ID? Can you all give us your definition? Because I don't believe that everybody knows the difference between France Connect and France Identity, or a clear definition. What do you mean by clear? Now, a clear legal definition, or a definition can be clear for a legal expert, but not clear for John Doe, and a clear definition for the man on the street won't be clear for a lawyer. In the meantime, we've seen the adoption of version 2 of IDAS, where we have definitions. I don't think there's a definition of digital ID per se, but there are definitions about ID information, but not ID per se. Indeed, it's a concept that is quite far-reaching and goes beyond what is currently covered by existing legislation, and it's quite difficult to define globally, in my opinion. No, you're right. We had the ADAS Directive 2014 implemented in 2016, looking at the different means to identify you digitally. If you use France Connect, you have a central ID that gives you access to a number of services in different European countries with the same level of trust. So either the level is substantial or high. If you go to Germany or to Poland, if you have the same equivalent, the same level, you can prove who you are, date of birth, place of birth, etc. Now the changes in the ADA legislation, this has changed the central information with the PIT. There are other attributes now which go further than just a central core identity. Some attributes are compulsory, mandatory, others are optional. It's harmonized at the European level, but not between, there's no convergence between the wallet and the identification, but I see I'm losing you. So I want to come back to what is really important. Certification, attestation. The example you were giving, Eric, you're a journalist. Journalist is a profession associated to a number, a press number, a photograph, etc. Now, this attestation to define what is a journalist, what is a doctor, what is a lawyer, everywhere in Europe, this is an ongoing effort. It's work in progress. So the different industrial sectors have to agree on what attributes constitute a given profession, for example. Tomorrow, Eric, if you want to prove to the forum who you are, or if you go to North America, again, we have to have a standardized definition. I think Dave can say a word about that. If we all speak the same language and we mean the same thing by the same word when we see that a given person is accredited or has a given level of authorization, then we will speak the same language and we will have a harmonization of attributes. Before I give the floor to Dave, so he tells us how it works in the US, I thought there were two digital identities, France identity for the ID and La Poste. Everything else was more access to accounts. Not really. Means of identification digital fall under our responsibility, whether it's La Poste, that's a substantial security level, so we can have a level of trust substantial, and France identity is at the high level because they've filled in the requirements of the INCYBER. There are other identification means which are not substantial or elevated or high. They're simple, where the level of trust is a bit lower. In terms of interoperability, if you go to the website of the European Commission or to the website managing delegations for member states, you have to choose your country of origin first, France, and then it gives you the different means of digital identification of substantial or high level of security. And this will allow you to access the service with a high level of confidence. When I connect to the working party of the Commission, my identity as Elias, working for ANSSI, is warranted by the identification means I use. And behind, just to make it even more confusing, what you have to understand about the ADAR documentation on the digital wallet, once you have a digital wallet, you regain control on your credentials, on your data, on what you want to share or not, but you will also have a direct connection with third parties without using an intermediary. France Connect will have to be compatible with the wallet, but you can do away totally with France Connect or a national identification to be in direct contact with different actors. It's a whole change, a whole evolution in the way. What is the situation in the US regarding digital identity?
Let me step back a second and just say, instead of digital identity, what is identity? Identity is who you are. It's not even necessarily your name or anything else, but it's you. It's you. And your digital identity is a digital token of you. That's probably the easiest way to describe a digital identity. Having said that, the US is nowhere near the EU in trying to put together a digital identity. We can't even figure out how to put together a common identity across the United States. We do not have a national ID card across all 50 states and 16 territories or whatever we have. So you look at the US, 48% of the US population has an active passport. That's it, 48%, not even half. So less than 150 million out of 300 have a passport to travel. Okay. Does that mean that half of the people in the US don't have an identity? No, because what they do is they go to the local state, sort of the equivalent, if you think of the EU, with all of the nation states as members, issuing their own driver's license or their own national ID card. So they have a driver's license in the US issued by one of the 50 states. The driver's license is issued for a period of 10 years. Every 3 to 5 years, they issue a new card because someone's hacked the old one. That means at any given time, you have in excess of 150 different issuing authority authorized documents out there representing who you could be. Now, having said that, that's just the physical IDs, right? So we have all the physical IDs that are out there. How do we talk about digital IDs in the US? Well, there's about 16 states so far, and there's more coming, that have started to issue mobile driver's licenses. The mobile driver's license is issued at the same time as the physical driver's license. So in the state of Virginia, they just now, I hate to say this, I don't have one, but we have a physical ID, and we are now having mobile IDs in the state of Virginia. It's issued by Virginia, but I walked into a bar the other day and I said, out of curiosity, are you prepared to accept a mobile ID as a proof of age? And they said to me, what are you talking about? So they don't even know that it's coming out in the public. So do we have a definitive case? No. The advantage you have here in the EU is you've had some countries leading the way. I was up in Estonia in 2019 at an EID conference there, and I thought that actually defined the electronic ID very well. You have a person at the center, you have the key characteristics of the person, and then you have all of the attributes associated to that person feeding off of that ID. Whether it's a school ID, a library card, a medical card, a press card, a government organization card, your passport, your tax payments, your health card, whatever it is, it's all tied to that central ID. That, in my mind, is a digital ID. But that's not in the US, that's here in the EU. But again, that's just Estonia, and I'm not sure that everybody else is doing that. It is following the ISO standards. I will say this, that the mobile driver's licenses being issued in the US are following the ICAO and ISO standards. You all know what ICAO is? International Civil Aeronautics Organization. It is the UN-based organization that says this is what a passport should look like. Well, because that's what passports look like, that's a good way for all the nation states to agree on what mobile driver's licenses need to be, believe it or not. So anyway, there are ISO standards associated with it. The US is following those. Are we there yet? Not even close. We don't even have a third of the states or not even a quarter of the states issuing mobile driver's licenses yet. They're coming. When they do get here, it's probably going to take a while for them to get, for the people to get familiar, for the bartenders to understand what a mobile ID is, for a bank to recognize what a mobile ID is, for a government agent who is accepting some form of Social Security or whatever to recognize that there is, in fact, a mobile ID. And they don't know that yet. So we have a long way to go. So the state of mobile ID or digital ID in the US is probably about this big.
Okay. C'est vrai qu'on prend souvent le...
It's true that we often cite Estonia as an example, but stop me if I'm wrong here. Belgium, I believe, also there's a pretty strong digital identity. Germany, Italy, no? Yeah, what's happening really is that each country has its own national identity system, and as Dave's just said, the advantage in Europe is that it's harmonized. So from a technological perspective, there's communication there. The ways of signing them out, the different networks which distribute these networks, but we're not. We're just talking about on your telephone, but we're talking about secure services. In France, there's got to be 400,000 high-level identities, these electronic signature systems, the sort of things that accountants, magistrates, lawyers are using. All these regulated professions, they're not just using this for fun. They have to use these secure systems. It's true with the digital wallet. Dave said, you go to a bar in the USA, they don't have to accept your digital version, your mobile version. But in the future, when we have this European identity wallet, you go and ask any institution, any administrative, even the web platforms, they will be obliged to accept it if it complies with that European format. And that's the sovereignty of all the standards that are currently being discussed, the levels of certification, the European level of certification. That's what we need to make sure that these digital identities, these digital identity wallets, whether it's a government-backed system, which will allow you to digitalize and numerize your day-to-day activities, they have to be backed up by key security. To guarantee you invite, it's like just having the right key to open up your lock to get into your house. That's your personal environment. Digitally speaking, our priority must be to make sure that the citizens, the keys we're issuing to our citizens to protect their identity online, or the attributes that go along with that is in a cryptographic format which is which gets through the Scylla and Charybdis of regulatory measurement. It provides the level of security and confidence that people need. That people, for example, that it's enough for the bouncer or the barman to know that you are indeed 18 or more, and applying that more to the banking sector and
à adresser à une problématique, c'est la vue.
Yeah, and this is another problem. That's that you think of the attacker's perspective. The attacker's perspective is relatively simple. Their identity is all of the elements, the identity information that a person will try to get at you to achieve you by social engineering. Social engineering is about knowing you so well that they know how to usurp your data, how to extort your data out of it. So all that information. There are 200 different perspectives on getting into a digital identity. You can have a very open digital identity, and there's a lot of things that we know about you, so it makes it a lot easier to get into, and others have a much more smaller, more secure, more controlled digital identity, so you're at a lower risk. So you've always got to bear that in mind. So we always have attackers. There are malicious persons who are looking to gather information on us to often find a way in to get us, so using what we call social engineering. Yeah, actually, I wanted to come back to a point. Another security aspect of security is very important, which is applicable to the national digital identities, and particularly these identity wallets. It's that unlike what Google or Facebook are doing, with the very bad habits of tracking everything that we do when we're using their services, it is forbidden for EU member states to trace and track the use of digital identity. So when you authenticate, when you sign into something using a digital identity, the government is not allowed to store that information. So we need proper cryptographic keys because it's difficult sometimes to detect when and so there's always a bit of a lag time of understanding when there are actually been instances of fraud. But it's really important for citizens to know that. Currently, the difference right now between connecting with your private ID, Google, your Facebook account, or a national system. In one case, if you're using Google, using Facebook, you're being followed. And in theory, if you're using a government identity tool, you shouldn't be being followed. So that's an asset. That's something which is important. And I think we also need to raise awareness, I think, to educate people because of the digital footprint that we leave behind us. These information which could be turned against us. Yeah, I'm talking. I know I have representatives of the CNIL. That's the French Civil Liberties and Agency in the room, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the EDAS regulation is based on GDPR primarily. So even us in our interministerial working group that we have working on the future evolution and revolution, my boss, but also the DLPG, the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministry for Security, and the CNIL, the CNIL as we call it, is the guarantor of that. We're very attentive to the standards and to our respect for the regulation, to make sure the regulations are completely affected. The unlinkability, you're familiar with, I don't have to, unlinkability, no need to translate that, don't worry about it, I'll do it for you, which is what Eric was describing a moment ago, is that it's these platforms, whether it's whoever is the emitter of the attestation, the person processing the attestation, they can't disclose the fact that it's linked to an individual person. Again, this is a matter of translation because there are near zero knowledge proof cryptographic keys which are being created, which are being standardized at the European level. We hope at the international level, but the proof that there is zero tracking, zero recognition. The European Commission has been really ambitious, I think, that with the technical specifications they've set out for that. And they've put in place a sort of process where you have to wait for a scientific precision, sector-wide standardization, and above and beyond the availability of these primitive cryptographic keys and the subcomponents of them, if you read the regulations, the actual letter of the regulation, there are a lot of elements in there in the risk register which oblige, and this is, there are punishments and sections. NIS 2 is applicable to all of these operators. So there are punishments which we know. Whether there is an obligation for platforms to not track and trace this activity, and then whether or not there are underlying cryptographic keys. So regular inspections, regular checks on all these service providers, and the NSSA looks very closely at security audits and security measures put in place by service providers, so as to make sure that your digital identity is safe. It's not being sold on to anybody else. And the verifier has no way of checking and retracing your digital activities. And that's one of the advantages of digital identity then, the untraceability, the non-traceability, the fact that you can divulge whatever information you want. You can go to a bar, whatever, and just say, check, here's my age. You don't need to know the rest. You just choose which information you reveal. Yeah, absolutely. It's very important, the ability to choose which information you reveal and what, because there's been a kind of ideological shift in this wallet. Previously, it used to be you'd have to go to a certifying authority. You'd have to sign up, you'd have to be registered, and you'd have to hand over all your ID data to, I am this person, I work at this place, I live here, and you get a digital certificate then, which would allow you to go about your business online in the future. You are becoming your own certifying authority. You're signed up with this government-backed agency. If you're, I don't know, for example, you're a member of the lawyers, you'll get a certain accreditation. If you're a member of a journalist organization, the Social Security Service will give you a certain information. Your bank will give you an international banking code. Your telephone operator can verify your phone number. All these different elements, you have them. You have them in your own hands, and you only divulge, you only share the information which you need to share for specific purposes. If you just need to prove that you are in between the 18 and 25 years old, or if you're over 65 years old, you want to get a discount, or to access a certain service or system, you are only needed to divulge that. You don't need to give them your name. You don't need to give them the date of birth, the place of birth. That's one of the great strengths, and that's why the European Commission's been so ambitious with this regulation, is that we have a form of harmonization now of all these standards, all these protocols, which will put power into the hands of citizens. I get the impression that despite all that, there is still a degree of conflict amongst a lot of people between this kind of freedom, that they would dream of freedom to go on the internet and be free and to do what we want, and the fact there's so much security that's required for that to happen. I'll give you an example. I saw this in a recent publication by the CNIL. You mentioned the National Data Liberty Authority. It's an example from South Korea, which this is a little while ago. It's 2007. They tested identity verification for online age verification for certain content online. The first was that if you posted a comment on a forum or on social media, that you had to leave your name. The second system was that you could lose a pseudonym, but the pseudonym that would be only able to use after verification of your identity. But ultimately, that was judged to be to fight against cyberbullying and online trolling, which is a entirely praiseworthy purpose. But it was judged to be unconstitutional. So that's why I say you feel that there's that kind of conflict between the freedom you're supposed to have online and the fact that there are these safeguards and security measures. I like the way that you use the word pseudonym that's used, because that's something which I forgot to mention. I don't think it's been mentioned yet with this digital identity, the fact that you can use a pseudonym when you have your digital wallets. So you can be responsible for your data, but without giving out anything, you don't even have to give your name. It has to be properly managed by specifications, because, as you said, some people are doing this. They're not just going to post a nice comments on the internet. This is also about decentralized finance. There are people who may be operating on platforms that are exchanging cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, not just money, it can be any crypto assets, and they don't want their identity to be associated or their pseudonyms to be associated. So again, it's down to the industrial ecosystem to put the certification process, which is currently the national certification scheme, which is still being finalized. They're going to determine the essential components of what a wallet needs to have. You can have a European wallet, you can have another wallet, you're going to have a country-by-country wallet. They're going to be different versions of these wallets, just to target the uses, the functions that users want to see. I don't think there's necessarily a contradiction between. I mean, it's really down to the stakeholders, down to the individual to define what they need. Because, to go back to a debate that we had this morning about identities and attestations, attestations are not necessarily linked to a digital wallet. They can live independently of wallets. There are certain attestations which must be connected to your identity, because we need to prove that you are you, and then associated with you. There are others that aren't. It really depends on what we're talking about. It depends really on the purpose and nature of the stakeholder who wants your, maybe just in certain cases, an attestation that you have such and such a qualification will be enough. But in other registration processes, they might need to see it associated with your identity. They might need to impose additional security measures. So I think security is such
C'est une question de curseur, ça dépend.
But it's a question of where to put to decide on the right level, the right dose. And it really depends on the purpose and what you're doing. It's about striking the balance between protecting your personal data, and again, hello to our friends from the CNIL, but anything is possible, really. Any reactions, responses? Well, I'm not going to go too much onto security. I think you did a really good job of advertising the European certification scheme, but I think it's interesting, and we've talked about this a little bit already. You have stakeholders, you're calling them stakeholders, people who have to set out the needs, the requirements. It's going to be, for me, I think it's going to be interesting to see who is going to decide, I don't need your name. I kind of get the impression a lot of people, by default, they're going to want to know what your name is. They don't need it. But I'm going to be interested to see what the stakeholders, the people asking for your data, well, they're not. And you see it in lots of other places too, the CRA, the applications of, people, if you make anyone manufacturing a product, they have to determine what that product is, they have to define it. And they want to minimize the data they have to supply. But I think there will be a certain conflict of interests. We're supposed to be minimizing data, but if in the CRA you have to declare a certain project and they tell you don't have to have their name, it's going to be interesting to see how this actually plays out in the real world, because currently we have a certain number of regulations which are interlinked in a manner which a lot of people don't necessarily realize, I think. So when in 2-3 years from now this all comes into full effect, be interesting to see how it actually works. But anyway, as I say, interesting times ahead.
Moi, je pense aussi que l'usage va...
Yeah, I think it's the use which is actually going to guide the evolution and the speed of this transition, because, our users of our applications, there's one first thing which is really interesting to them, and it really stands out when you connect to our application for the first time, is that they see all the information that is readily available about them online, all the information that they have voluntarily or involuntarily published online, and they rapidly become aware that, wow, basically almost all the key aspects, their name, their address, their age, their marital status, whether they have children or not, that information is often readily available online. And you can find where it comes from as well. It's often platform, social media, Facebook, LinkedIn. Very often it's been hacked. There's data that's been leaked from somewhere, and you're getting stolen data. But it's a way of making it visible to people. Oh wow, hang on, why is that information out there? Why did I fill in that information when I was buying something? I didn't need to give them that information. And it's interesting that education through risk, that is really going to accelerate the transition, the transformation. That when we become more aware of the real extent of our exposure, our private exposure online. That's going to be really important to powering the transition.
So if I can add to that, it's not just the information that you give unwillingly, but the information you do give willingly. I mentioned the kids selling, basically, I will give you $100 for a fake ID and I'm going to give you all my personal info. That's a huge problem in and of itself. But we also have agencies that I know in the government at US, we have an organization called OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. They had everybody's personal information that worked in the government, and it got hacked. Hackers broke in, stole all the data. Hackers broke into Yahoo, stole all the users' data off of Yahoo. Same with AOL. T-Mobile, a European phone company, Verizon, a US phone company, all had their databases hacked. Over 1 billion identities are stolen and sitting out on the dark web. And where I have a problem with it is that you have also about 1 billion people who have no identity. So they don't exist in any database anywhere in the world. If I find a lookalike for one of those people in one of the identity databases that was hacked, I can now morph the two photos and come up with a unique ID for that person, thereby creating what looks like a new ID. And I know we're jumping ahead to AI and things of that nature, but there are a lot of ways that legitimately collected data is not properly handled. And I know that we have security protocols out there to be monitored, but what I've found is that the security protocols are only as good as the people that are managing them. So I'll leave it at that in terms of identities. Your identity is out there whether you put it there or not, and it can't get stolen or it can be given away.
Bon, je vois que l'heure tourne. J'ai encore.
Well, I can see time is ticking away. So I've got a couple of quick questions left, and then if anyone in the room has any questions left, I'm afraid I think you're going to have to catch them outside and over a coffee because we're running out of time. But my first question here is, how are we going to? I'm looking to all of you now. How are we going to restore public confidence, particularly those who are particularly far away from digital services? You know, older people. How are we going to make them trust in digital identity and to understand that the digital identity on our smartphone is a valid way of identifying yourself? I'll paraphrase what the prefect this morning said on a roundtable session. That was Angèle Baudouin en français. She mentioned a LinkedIn post where somebody who from 80-odd years old had written on LinkedIn said, "Oh, I love this digital identity thing." I mean, to hit that kind of age group, all you need to do is explain to people, look, if you're photocopying your ID card and sending it off in the post, you're never getting that back. That's, you know, in the future, you'll have this digital system which has an expiry date, and every single attribute associated with it is verifiable, it's checkable. The notions here aren't particularly complex. It's not too hard for your parents or your grandparents to understand. It's going to become natural to use all these technologies, and having a digital identity with attributes that are associated to it, it's something which is new, that you can declare that your data has been stolen or that it's obsolete, and you can immediately bring it back to have that security. You're not going to have to go queue up at the police station to complain that you've dropped your ID card somewhere. I think that message is not too hard to sell. You know, contrary to what some people might think, I don't think it's hard for anybody to grasp that they are going to be able to take back control of their attributes and the life cycle of that data, because, you know, in the past, when you lost your digital certificate, you had to contact the registering authority, you had to sign forms, you had to go and see them in person for them to revoke that DAS1 certificate. You know, the user friendliness has considerably progressed in the future. This is what you explained. You can rent a car, you can rent a house, and get a loan, whatever. Your data will not be online. You can retain that greater degree of control over your own data. Good reaction? I'm a little bit less optimistic than that. Largely on the basis of my personal experience, because you know, I am the guardian of the passwords of my my own parents, and my daughter helps me with this. You know, she's very good at computers. But she handles a lot of the IT duties for the grandparents. But yeah, I have special access to my parents. My parents don't even realise that their data could be out there online somewhere. I think there is some work to still to be done. I think when people realise that there is potentially a risk, okay, then things can start moving forward. But currently, and then things will change. Obviously, you know, these people are starting to be very old people now. But there is a generation which is still not autonomous in their use of technologies. So for those people, I think it's going to be complicated. You know, I'm saying my own parents, for example. I've had to declare my parents' taxes for them since it has to be done online these days. They don't know how to do it, so I do it for them. And there's a lot of areas like that. And that problem is not going to solve itself. I think it's going to take a fair bit of time, actually.
I want to second that. My 98-year-old dad still does not know that he can do video chat on his cell phone. He does not understand what a digital ID really means. He just thinks it's a photo of him on the phone or a snapshot of his driver's license. But I think there's a simple word, and it's education, because I think you're right. I think if you take the time to explain it, not everyone will understand it, but a lot of people will. And then the more people start to understand it and the more people start to use it over time, you'll see that adoption. Think back. I can't remember it. I'm too young for that. But there was a time when we did not have driver's licenses. You just jumped in a car and you drove. And all of a sudden, oh, you need a driver's license to drive? Oh, check that out. Isn't that cool? Now everyone says, what do you mean you don't have a driver's license, right? So it's going to take time for this to materialize, to shift from physical IDs to digital IDs. My personal belief is physical IDs will never go away. Go through customs and get pulled to secondary, they're not going to look at your digital ID. So that's my spiel on it.
Et ma dernière question en 1 minute.
Last question, 1 minute. Just one quick. AI, in your opinion, what will be or what is already its role in improving and in influencing the evolution of the security of digital identity? Nothing? AI is a tool. It's something which allows us to multiply our powers, if you want. I mean, that's true of attackers and defenders. So the attackers, they're going to get better at attacking us. They're going to have better false IDs. Those on the defense side, we need better methods of detection, which are better at detecting that AI, and it's going to continue. That loop, the vicious feedback loop continues. AI is just a technological tool for me. I mean, for a lot of cases, that's going to be true. But when we're talking about identity specifically, AI does offer ways of multiplying and combining data, which could be quite terrifying, in fact. If you think of that film, Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio, that was like homemade social engineering, just fishing for information. AI, from the attacker's perspective, is like industrial scale social engineering. It's really upscaling. So for an attacker, it's a really important market opportunity. They used to just be targeting senior directors. Now they can go and target people at ever levels because it's really AI is boosting their profit, their efficiency. So that's really interesting for hackers. Yeah, NSI is not going to contradict ENA ISA, but I can speak in terms of, in France, for artificial intelligence. My colleague's over there hiding at the back, now I'm pointing him out. He's got all the answers about AI. If you want to ask anybody about how it applies to us, go and ask that guy over there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you have any questions, I'm afraid you'll have to do it face-to-face outside of a coffee. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.